Washington, D.C. Bureau. It's good to be with you. Thank you for joining us. Here's a look at some of the stories we are watching right now. U.S. inflation surges to a new 4-decade high, with overall consumer prices soaring 9.1% since last year. How is the White House reacting to the latest figures? And when might those high costs level off? Plus, as his administration deals with the bad economic news at home, President Biden is abroad and arriving in Israel on the first stop of his Middle East trip. The commander-in-chief says the U.S. would be willing to use force if needed to stop Iran's growing nuclear program. Our Ed O'Keefe joins us from Jerusalem with the latest. And in its latest hearing, the January 6 House Select Committee accused former President Trump of possible witness tampering. What we've learned so far on that investigation and what's coming next. Plus, survivors and families affected by gun violence in Uvalde and Highland Park head to the U.S. Capitol to call on lawmakers to take more action, what they're demanding while they're in Washington. And later this hour, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been eyeing a 2024 run. What moves he's making now to potentially shore up his conservative base. But we begin tonight with new figures showing record inflation in the U.S. The inflation rate hit a 40-year record in June. Consumer prices increased by 9.1% over the last 12 months. According to the Department of Labor, prices went up for food, rent, and medical care. For more on inflation, Jeff Mason and Colby Smith join us now. Jeff is a White House correspondent for Reuters, and Colby is the U.S. economics editor for the Financial Times. Jeff, the White House has put out a statement calling the latest inflation report and economic report, quote, unacceptably high, but it claims the inflation rate does not reflect decreases in gas prices. Walk us through the administration's response.
Well, what's interesting, Robert, is the administration has started to respond to this even before the numbers came out. You had Brian Deese, President Biden's top economic advisor yesterday, and others from his economic council saying, look, these numbers are going to be bad, but they don't reflect the latest. And one of the reasons is the one that you just mentioned, that gasoline prices have actually come down. They were averaging over $5 a gallon last month, and now they're below that on average. Although as I was just walking home tonight, I still saw some that were over $5. So I think consumers are obviously still really, really feeling the pinch and the hit of high fuel prices, of high rents. And that creates a political problem for President Biden. And that's why, as you said in that statement, they are calling this unacceptably high while also trying to say it's not going to stay this bad. It is going to get better. We are seeing some progress, at least on the energy side, in the last few weeks.
Sharp points. Colby, break down these latest numbers for us. How is 9.1% inflation affecting the American people and their ability to pay for food and other essential items?
It's having an absolutely major impact for Americans here across the board. It's not just energy prices, as you mentioned, it's food as well, and across most goods and services, frankly. So a report like this one is pretty disastrous. Not just for Americans, but for the Biden administration as well. And it's simply because we're just seeing this firming of prices across the board. And the worrisome sign is, while we might see some moderation in energy prices, and we've already seen that, especially with gas prices in particular and some commodities, the issue is that we have core prices, so those stripping out those volatile items like food and energy and other services-related inflation, really firming in this past month. And that's a very alarming sign, both for the administration and for the Federal Reserve, which has really ramped up the aggressiveness in which it's raising interest rates in order to restore price stability.
Jeff, the Biden administration's response to inflation has mostly focused on bringing down energy prices, gas prices. But what is the administration doing to try to cut prices across the board beyond just that?
Well, there's not that much that they can do, although they are calling on Congress to do more. They have said that the president's agenda, what was formerly known as Build Back Better, would help bring down prices. So they're working on that, but they also have a pretty big reliance on the Fed. And Colby just mentioned the Fed. One of the offshoots, or one of the results of today's really bad numbers, is the Fed will almost certainly raise interest rates 0.75 points at the end of this month, perhaps an entire point. So there's some talk about that in the market today, which will have an even bigger impact on consumers as well. It will drive up the cost of borrowing. It will be felt in their pocketbooks as well. So politically, it's rough. To your initial question, the president is trying to say we're working on this, but his hands are at least partially tied. And that is not an argument that sells well, and it's certainly not an argument that Republicans are accepting.
Colby, let's stick with the Federal Reserve for a moment. For a layperson who doesn't understand monetary policy in the way someone who's a top editor at the Financial Times might, what can the Fed do here for the average working person to try to alleviate the economic pain?
So the Fed's tools, while they're the most direct way in which a policymaker can impact inflation here, actually faces a quite limited impact to a certain extent as well, given the nature of the inflation shock. So where the Fed is most effective is through the demand channel, meaning by raising interest rates, it increases the cost of borrowing, which therefore potentially changes people's plans to invest in certain items, to make big ticket purchases, let's say to buy a home if mortgage prices are rising. So that's the way in which the Fed is trying to impact the inflation story to date. But the big problem is that much of this inflation is in fact supply driven. We've had huge spikes in energy costs, food prices, and other commodities. And at the same time, we still have these lingering COVID lockdowns across the globe, and of course, another uptick in cases as well in the U.S. and around the world. And what that is really doing is gumming up supply chains, which is keeping upward pressure on prices. So this leaves the Fed in a bit of a conundrum here because its tool is quite blunt. And so what it's forced to do is raise interest rates quite dramatically in order to affect the parts of the economy in which demand is quite high. But that risks really jeopardizing not only the labor market, but a lot of people that are still struggling under the weight of the pandemic and high prices in particular.
And Colby, a lot of people tonight are looking at their bank accounts and their wallet and trying to wonder, as they look ahead down the calendar, whether they have enough money for a vacation or a trip in the fall or to pay for a college semester. I know there's a diversity of views, but what's the consensus among economists about where the inflation rate is going to go between now and, let's say, the end of the year?
I think the expectation at this point is that we will see an eventual moderation. You are going to get that easing up of energy inflation in light of the fact that gas prices and energy prices more broadly, as we've already mentioned, have already come down to a certain extent. But the real question is not necessarily when we're going to see a peak in inflation, but where inflation is going to settle. And I think that's the big open-ended question for economists at the moment, because in a report like we saw in June, we have the firming of several categories across goods and services, which is really going to counteract some of that rolling over in inflationary pressures on the energy side. So I think the expectation is that inflation is going to settle far higher than this 2% goal that the Fed targets, and it could be anywhere upwards of 3 or 4%.
Jeff Mason, Colby Smith, thank you very much. At the end of Tuesday's January 6 House Committee hearing, Vice Chairwoman Liz Cheney said there is new evidence. Former President Trump attempted to contact one of the witnesses cooperating with the panel. The committee has alerted the Justice Department.
After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. Scott, good to have you up at the Capitol. As ever, earlier today, the chairman of the January 6th committee, Benny Thompson, he addressed the former president's alleged attempt to contact a witness. As you've been roaming around the Capitol, talking to your sources, what have you learned about what the committee knows?
According to the chairman, who spoke with reporters late today, Bob, there was no voicemail left in that phone call from Donald Trump to this witness, at least as far as the chairman knows, he says. What's more, he made clear they haven't made one of those official referrals for prosecution to the Justice Department, which Congress has done in the past. He says he just made them aware that the committee believes Donald Trump tried to call a witness who is yet to be made publicly known by the committee, and that witness didn't take the call, but instead forwarded information about the call on to his or her lawyer, who ultimately notified the committee, who has now ultimately notified the Department of Justice. We've been calling the Department of Justice for comment. They won't give comment, nor do we expect them to. They rarely, if ever, comment on investigations that have not been announced or opened officially or closed officially. But this is obviously a concern, and a growing concern for the committee, Bob. This is just the latest example that they've announced of alleged witness tampering, interference, or phone calls of questionable content.
A lot of open questions about that, lingering questions. Who was he calling? Why was he calling? We don't have those answers. But we do know, Scott, that the January 6th committee will hold its next hearing, prime time, next Thursday night. What do you expect?
Committee members are telling me this could be their finale. It could be their valedictory. It'll happen in prime time, and the committee members are now coalescing around a focus, saying it'll be what they characterize as dereliction of duty. What Donald Trump said, what he didn't say, what he did, what he didn't do during the 3 hours in which violence was at its peak here on the Capitol grounds, January 6th. So it feels like it'll be channeled and focused very specifically, like a fine point, on former President Trump, his actions or inactions. It'll be led, I'm told, by Virginia Democrat Elaine Luria, the one member of this committee we have not seen present at one of the public hearings, and Illinois Congressman, the Republican Adam Kinzinger. That's the last announced hearing, but Chairman Thompson told reporters late today he won't rule out more hearings, and there's a fundamental reason for that, Bob. As you know as well as anybody, they're doing intake still, even as they present their findings. They're still digesting and seeking new interviews, so they're not ruling out the possibility of more hearings later this summer, even early this fall.
Scott, former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon is once again this week trying to delay his contempt of Congress trial, this time from July 18th to mid-October. What's the Bannon argument, and is there any chance of a delay?
Interesting question, because he tried this already and failed yesterday in court. He's been seeking to delay his trial, citing, among many other reasons, the prominence of his name in the January 6th committee public hearings. He has called it potentially inflammatory and a potential agent of bias against the Washington, D.C. jurors who would sit for his trial. He renewed that argument today, saying he was mentioned again in yesterday's hearing, that the committee showed that clip of his podcast from January 5th, 2021, in which he said famously he expected all hell to break loose on January 6th. So he has renewed and to a degree amplified an argument that has already failed in court. It is quite clear he does not want to go on trial Monday. He wants to push it back at least till mid-October. He's back in court. At least his case is back in court tomorrow, 10 a.m. Washington, D.C. time. We'll see, Bob, if the argument has any more success this time.
Scott, you've done extensive reporting on people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, the insurrection efforts. David Blair of Maryland was sentenced to 5 months in prison for his involvement in the Capitol riot. What do you know about his case and where it stands?
His case is a unicorn. It is unlike any other. First of all, he's accused of and acknowledged bringing a Confederate flag attached to a lacrosse stick, along with a knife, to the Capitol January 6th. And during proceedings today, it was acknowledged by his defense lawyer, kind of cross-checked a police officer, made contact with the lacrosse stick. Not the first person accused of bringing a Confederate flag, not the first person accused of making contact with police, certainly. David Blair, while asking for leniency today from the federal judge, says he wasn't here January 6th to protest the election. He was here, he said, because he was protesting, in his words, the erasing of history and the toppling of Confederate statues. So this 27-year-old man from Maryland who lives with his parents at home brought a Confederate flag to the Capitol that day for that reason, showing again there's so much we still don't know about who was in this crowd January 6th and why. The judge says before sentencing David Blair to 5 months in prison for his guilty plea in January 6th, that it was clear David Blair came here ready for a fight and looking for one. He brought a knife, brought a Confederate flag in the year 2021 outside the U.S. Capitol.
Meanwhile, Scott, protesters, including people affected by the shootings in Highland Park, Illinois, and Uvalde, Texas, they've been rallying for gun control at the Capitol this week. What do they want to see from Congress, especially after Congress just passed a bipartisan piece of gun legislation?
I spent some time at that rally today. It was a mixture of families from the Highland Park, Illinois community and the Uvalde, Texas community. The Highland Park shooting July 4th, the Uvalde, Texas shooting 50 days ago, wearing those orange shirts, carrying those orange signs, calling unequivocally for a federal assault weapons ban. Doing so outside a U.S. Capitol in which Congress was in session, a Congress that just recently passed a much more incremental change to gun laws, expanding access to red flag laws through which courts can order guns seized from people deemed dangerous, background checks for those under the age of 21, much more incremental changes. It's an indication of the political reality for those who voted in favor of that bill and the Biden administration that just days later, there is a restive group of gun control activists who say the Congress, the administration need to go much further up.
Scott McFarland, thank you as always. President Biden arrives in Israel for the first leg of his Middle East trip. How the president is pledging support for Israel and what he is saying about a renewal of the Iran nuclear deal. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital.
We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
people from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
President Biden arrived in Israel Wednesday for his first trip to the Middle East as commander-in-chief. White House officials say he will meet with Israeli, Palestinian, and Saudi Arabian leaders. In an interview with Israel's Channel 12, President Biden discussed U.S. efforts to help reach a nuclear deal with Iran.
It's a gigantic mistake for the last president to get out of the deal. They're closer to a nuclear weapon now than they were before. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the Quds Force is going to stop or they're going to continue to be engaged in activities. We can act against them and still have a deal where they curtail their nuclear program. And so I still think it makes sense. We've laid out on the table, we've made the deal, we've offered it, and it's up to Iran now.
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us with more from Jerusalem. Ed, good to have you with us. As we just heard, President Biden is strongly in favor of returning to the Iran nuclear deal. So how will the signing of the Jerusalem Declaration, they're calling it, affect those talks and the overall relationship between the U.S. and Israel?
Well, by signing that agreement, Bob, and essentially having these two countries, the United States and Israel, two steadfast allies, agree to continue stopping Iran and doing everything they can to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, it'll be seen here, at least, by Israeli leaders as a sign of the U.S. commitment to do so. They're concerned about the broader discussions between European leaders, China, the United States, about ending Iran's deal because they just don't see it as having enough teeth to stop what they view now as inevitable, and that is Iran's ability to develop uranium and then ultimately a nuclear weapon. So they will tell the president, I'm sure at some point today they probably did, they will do it again tomorrow in meetings, abandon that discussion, don't allow those talks to continue. But in the meantime, this Jerusalem Accord, as they're calling it, or Jerusalem Declaration, designed to shore that up and demonstrate that at least the United States and Israel strongly opposed to this. And remember, it's a problem and a concern of many countries in this region, Saudi Arabia, other Arab countries who are no fans of Iran, also concerned about the possibility that it develops nuclear weapons and becomes an even bigger threat to this region.
Ed, beyond those discussions about the Iran nuclear deal, what else is President Biden hoping to accomplish on this trip to the Middle East before he gets to Saudi Arabia?
You might think it would be getting the Israelis and Palestinians to talk about a two-state solution, but he conceded in public comments today and in that interview with Israeli television that that's something that can't be done right now. It's unclear who's going to be leading Israel in the long term as they await elections in November, as a fragile coalition government's falling apart. The Palestinian Authority is still seen as too weak and corrupt, not only by the Israelis, but even the Palestinian people and the broader region. So at some point, the hope is that those discussions can happen again, but for now, it's not going to. On Friday, before he leaves for Saudi Arabia, he'll make a visit to East Jerusalem and announce plans to donate a significant amount of American funds to Palestinian medical organizations in a sign of how seriously he takes his own relations with Palestinian leaders. He's going to make that visit on his own, not accompanied by Israeli officials who had asked to go along with him. He said, no, I'll take this visit alone. Talking to some people here on the streets of Jerusalem who are Palestinian, they noted that. They found that interesting. They see it as a bit of pride that this president, who knows this region well, who's making his 10th visit to the region, understands that an American president going to meet with Palestinian officials alone, without Israeli government officials in tow, is a sign of respect and how seriously he takes them.
Ed, eventually on this trip, the president will make his way to Saudi Arabia. What are the expectations about his discussion with the Saudi Crown Prince?
Well, that there isn't necessarily going to be a discussion with just Mohammed bin Salman. He's going for a regional conference that's going to bring together the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, handful of others, and they're going to be holding this regularly scheduled conference. This is one of several different regional conferences the president has attended either in person or virtually over the course of this year as he tries to restore U.S. relations with the world after the Trump administration. In the midst of meetings with the Saudis, the king will be there, King Salman, but also his son, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And so the White House has said, look, he'll be part of these conversations. There's no plan necessarily for one-on-ones. At least that's what they say publicly. The Saudis say there will be. The question will be, is there a photo of that exchange? Is there any video of it? And does MBS get to walk away having held that meeting with the American president and trying to restore his validity, his reputation on the world stage? We've seen this before with other dictators around the world. For example, when a president goes to Latin America and the leader of Venezuela or Cuba tries to get a few moments of grip and grin with the American president. It's happening here, and we'll see how exactly it's orchestrated. For now, notably, we don't have guarantees from the White House that we will see much of the president when he holds these meetings late Friday and Saturday because of limited press access. That may be by design to rob MBS of that validity or that scene that he wants the world to see, but also frustrating for those of us, of course, who want to be able to have eyes on him as much as possible when he's on the road.
Ed, what do we know about the U.S. Secret Service member who was briefly detained by Israeli police after an alleged physical altercation?
Yeah, once again, this has happened. CBS News has learned an off-duty Secret Service agent was sent home from Israel after an altercation at a Jerusalem bar for allegedly shoving a woman. The Secret Service says they're investigating the incident. This is the second time this year this has happened. A similar incident of alleged wrongdoing occurred before the president's visit to Seoul, South Korea. Of course, there have been examples of this in years past. Another black eye for the Secret Service as it, of course, continues to provide protection for the president when he's on the road.
Ed O'Keefe, safe travels. Thank you very much. Both chambers of Congress held hearings on reproductive health rights on Wednesday before the House is set to vote on 2 abortion-related bills. CBS's Skylar Henry reports from Washington.
I never would have dreamed that I would be able to tell people about my abortion.
Abortion rights activist Sarah Lopez of Texas told a House panel about her personal experience with the procedure.
I wish I didn't have to talk about something so personal in this setting. But I hope that by being here today, people who currently need abortions know that they're not alone.
The committee heard testimony from witnesses who blasted the Supreme Court decision that is expected to lead to abortion bans in about half the states.
I cannot overstate how much legal uncertainty and chaos that this Supreme Court has unleashed.
Lawmakers also heard from witnesses who hailed the Dobbs ruling.
Dobbs gives women a voice and a vote. It presents an opportunity for America to restore a culture that values families, mothers, and women.
The hearing comes as the House is set to vote on 2 abortion-related bills Friday. Neither is likely to go anywhere in the evenly divided Senate. One bill would codify the right to an abortion into federal law. The other would ban states from interfering with a woman's right to travel to get the procedure.
We need more pro-choice senators in the Senate willing to waive the filibuster so we can protect women.
At a Senate Health Committee hearing Wednesday, Democrats said the fight was far from over. Skylar Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
A former investigator with the January 6th committee is now running for Senate in Missouri. He joins me next to answer why he's running and what it was like working for the committee. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Here's a look at some of our top stories. U.S. inflation has hit a 40-year high, driving up the prices of food, rent, and medical care. The Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates again later this month in an attempt to ease consumer costs. Plus, Steve Dettelbach has been sworn in as the new head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Dettelbach is the ATF's first Senate-confirmed director since 2015. And activists and families affected by gun violence rallied on Capitol Hill Wednesday to call for stricter gun control laws and a federal ban on assault weapons. Deborah Alfarone has more from the White House.
The agony and anger of losing loved ones in recent mass shootings nationwide took center stage on Capitol Hill.
Our communities are paying the high price. We're paying the price of our sanity. We're paying the price of our peace.
Just last week, a mass shooter killed 7 people at a July 4th parade in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park.
Highland Park has experienced something that no community should ever experience.
Mary Jo Tinkoff, her husband, and 2 young boys ran for their lives that day as the 21-year-old suspect opened fire using a high-powered military-style assault weapon.
I look over at my husband, I glance at him, and he just screams, "Run."
Newly released surveillance video shows police in action as the gunman in Uvalde, Texas, massacred young students and teachers using an AR-15 style rifle. With President Biden overseas, several of the families impacted by the gun violence in Uvalde and in Highland Park came to the White House to talk to deputy-level staffers about what can be done to prevent future tragedies.
We want a federal ban on assault weapons now.
U.S. lawmakers passed a new gun control bill last month requiring enhanced background checks, among other things, for anyone under 21 buying firearms. But President Biden is pushing for Congress to go further, calling for the return of the assault weapons ban of 1994 that he helped pass when he was a senator.
In that 10 years it was law, mass shootings went down.
The Democratic-led House is expected to pass a new bill, which would create a communications network to inform communities when active shooters are in their area. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, the White House.
A former senior investigator for the January 6th committee is running for U.S. Senate in Missouri. John Wood needs to receive 10,000 signatures by August 1st to be added to the November ballot. He says he has already received thousands of signatures. Wood departed the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol insurrection late last month to launch his campaign. And John Wood joins us now. John, thanks so much for being here. What compelled you to leave your role on this high-profile committee to run for office in an already crowded field?
Much the same reason that led me to work for the January 6th committee in the first place, which is that our country is extremely divided right now, and we need leaders who are going to help unite us and help heal this country. And that's why I went to work for the January 6th committee, and that's what led me to get into this Senate race, because nowhere is that division among American people more evident than in the U.S. Senate race in Missouri, where my party, the Republican Party, appears poised to nominate a disgraced former governor who resigned because he blackmailed his mistress with nude photos, and even after that has been credibly accused by his ex-wife of domestic violence. And on the Democratic side, that's also a race to the bottom. So you can be the most extreme and the most divisive. And I don't think that's what the American people want. I don't think that's what Missouri voters want. We want somebody who's going to help unite us and bring us together.
There's been a third-party attempts in different Senate races before. I think back to Kansas in 2014. What makes you believe an independent candidacy in Missouri this time around can actually be successful?
Yeah, this is really an extraordinary time in general, and in particular in this race. As I was just saying, it looks likely that the Republican nominee is going to be the disgraced former governor who had to resign from office. He appeals to a very small sliver of the Republican primary base, but he's going to do very poorly in a general election. I think that most mainstream conservatives will support me, and Missouri is a very conservative Republican state, so I don't think the Democrat who would inevitably support Chuck Schumer for majority leader would do well either. So I think this is a unique opportunity for an independent or unaffiliated candidate to do well. And I would note, my goal here is not to destroy the Tea Party system. Instead, I'm trying to transform American politics by sending a message to both parties that the race to the bottom, to be as divisive and as extreme as you can be in order to get a nomination of your party, is not going to work in the general election.
But is Greitens a surefire candidate at this point?
No. He is leading in most of the polls of the Republican field, even after his ex-wife made these under oath allegations of domestic abuse. So I think it's likely he'll be the nominee. But the other leading candidates for the nomination are also engaged in a race to the bottom to try to be as divisive and extreme in an effort to get the primary victory. But I want to send a message that that's not going to work in November.
But why not just jump into the Republican primary if you want to make sure the Republican Party goes in your direction?
Yeah, because I didn't want to play that game. As I said, it seems like all the leading candidates in the Republican primary are in a race to the bottom to be as divisive and as extreme as they can be. And they're doing it for a reason. They're doing it, obviously, because they think that works in a primary where you can appeal to a very small sliver of the base. And I didn't want to engage in that. I want to be a candidate who can help unite Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And so the way to do that is in the general election, where that message is really going to resonate with that, core of probably 80% or so of Missouri voters who reject the extreme left and the extreme right and want someone in the mainstream.
But if you continue with this candidacy, and let's say Greitens is the nominee for the Republicans, won't you have to build a coalition with some of those former candidates from the Republican primary?
Yes, I think that particularly if it's Eric Greitens as the Republican nominee, a lot of the voters in the Republican primary will not find him to be an acceptable alternative. If he wins, whoever wins that Republican primary will probably do so with somewhere around 25% of the vote in the primary. So 3/4 of the people in that Republican primary will have voted for a different candidate. And I think those are voters that I can pick off. And then, of course, there are a lot of people who don't vote in the primary, or maybe independents, or even some moderate Democrats who would support me.
Have you spoken to former Senator Danforth, Senator Roy Blunt, who's retiring, about your candidacy and talked them through why you believe they should support you?
Yeah, Senator Danforth is actually the one who inspired me to get into this race. A few months ago, he came out with a poll that showed that a race between a generic Republican, a generic Democrat, and a Republican running as an independent, but in the mold of a Jack Danforth or a Roy Blunt, that it would be a very close three-way race. And he called on somebody to get into this race in that mold, who would be somebody who's going to help unite Missourians rather than divide us. My first job right out of college was for Senator Danforth, and so I listened to his call for somebody to step up and serve and decided that it was my honor and my obligation to do so. So he's really the reason that I got into this race.
What does Senator Hawley do if it's Greitens versus you for that right side of Missouri?
That's an interesting question. Senator Hawley would have to speak for himself, but he has called for Eric Greitens to get out of the race because he thinks he is unfit to serve in the U.S. Senate. So I don't see how Senator Hawley could say that and then turn around and endorse Eric Greitens. So I would welcome Senator Hawley's support, and I look forward to serving with him in the U.S. Senate to serve the interests of Missouri voters.
Let's talk a bit more about your time on the January 6th committee. What were you seeking to accomplish inside the committee? It's still ongoing. I know you're probably sensitive about talking too much about those private discussions, but let's be blunt here. Is this about trying to compile enough evidence so that the Justice Department can make a full evaluation of whether the former president committed a crime?
It's about compiling all the evidence so the American people can know what happened. because the fundamental goal of the committee is to make sure that something like what happened on January 6th never happens again. And so the hearings have shed a lot of light on that. The release of some excerpts of depositions and some documents has as well. And then ultimately, I think the committee sometime in the fall will come out with a very thorough report that's going to lay out all of the facts as they found them. And I think that will be of great interest to the Justice Department, but that's not the reason the committee is doing it. The committee is doing it so the American people know what happened and that we can take steps to make sure something like that never happens again.
John Wood, thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is making moves with an eye on a possible presidential run in 2024. We talk with the author of a new article on what DeSantis is doing behind the scenes and what it might mean to help fuel his possible candidacy. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS. Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday Morning.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming racism.
I feel like it's just a war zone between all different races.
Will this generation continue the problem?
The kids pushed them away and didn't want them to be there because of their race.
Or be the solution?
We just need to keep raising our voices. We're all human and we don't deserve that type of treatment just because of how we look.
Are the kids all right? Racism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
The number of Cubans migrating to the United States is surging in a wave not seen since 1980. U.S. government data reveals more than 140,000 Cubans fled the island between October to May, a tenfold increase from the fiscal year 2020. This comes amid an alarming economic crisis in Cuba. The Biden administration has granted 2,000 visas annually to Cuban immigrants since taking office. Still, officials say Cuban migrants are arriving at the southern border and by sea outside of Florida. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recently convened with dozens of peers as he runs for re-election and eyes a possible presidential run in 2024. Politico published an article Tuesday reporting that he held a day-long conference with top national donors, Republican governors and contenders, and conservative media influencers. DeSantis' political operation reportedly described the event as an opportunity for the governor to connect with individuals who support him and share his political priorities. A campaign spokesman for the governor declined to comment to Politico. The author of this piece, reporter Daniel Lippman, joins us now. He is a White House and Washington reporter for Politico. Daniel, great to have you with us. We really appreciate you taking the time. This article has gotten a lot of traction, and it gives us a prism into someone who's pretty closed in terms of his political operation, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. What did you learn about this event?
So this happened a few weeks ago. It was kind of overshadowed by the Roe v. Wade ruling, the day before. This happened in Fort Lauderdale. It gathered together dozens of his top national donors and people like Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, Henry McMaster, the governor of South Carolina, and other conservative media influencers so that they can all exchange business cards and get to know each other. It kind of reminds one of the donor meetings at Succession, where they're going to pick the next president. And so DeSantis is clearly looking to 2024. And so it behooves him to help his people, people like those critical early state governors.
Daniel, you said he's clearly looking toward 2024. What are you hearing about that behind the scenes? What is he doing beyond this this event? What's he saying perhaps at this event and in other forums?
So unfortunately, reporters were not allowed at the event. It only came out a few weeks later. But I think it used to be conventional wisdom in Washington that if Trump was going to run in 2024, that people like DeSantis would hold their powder. They wouldn't run because they wouldn't want to piss him off. They would feel like there's little chance of them winning against Trump. But now Trump has been weakened by the January 6th hearings, and a lot of people look at what Chris Christie did in 2012 or what he did not do, which is he lost his chance to run for president. And so usually people have only one good chance to run, and DeSantis, people don't want to be seen as used old news. And so DeSantis is clearly the one of the top two frontrunners besides Donald Trump, and he can't wait too long. And so he is making these early moves to get in position for the next cycle.
Money is such an issue for any potential candidate for president. What do we know about DeSantis and fundraising?
He's a very good fundraiser. Not every governor has a national fundraising network. And this is such a huge part of politics these days because of Citizens United and the fact that you really need to raise as much money as possible. And so you kind of go a long way when you are helping your donors meet other governors and people like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was running for Arkansas governor. And so he can kind of point to his donors and say, look, I'm kind of delivering both on policies and on helping you almost in cocktail party chatter. So for people who are big donors from New York, when they go to parties in the Hamptons, they can say, well, look, DeSantis is not some robot. He is actually a person who is a kind of a real human being. He was moderating these panels of governors at a dinner, moderating the conservative media pundits. They're trying to soften his image, which has been seen as kind of that he is stiff. And so they want to, you can't be seen as someone who doesn't have that charisma to win the presidency.
Daniel, you've reported on the inside world of the Trump political operation for a long time. What do they make of all of this? DeSantis making these sorts of moves toward 24, even if it's about 22, it clearly has an echo and sound about 2024 as he goes about all of this activity.
So they are not really openly, fighting it out because neither of them have declared for the presidency. I think they're kind of waiting to see how January 6th shakes out, and you don't want to declare too early. Trump's advisors have told him not to declare because it would hurt the Republican chances in the midterms. But they clearly see DeSantis as a threat. They feel like Trump made him who he was. He was seen as a Trump Republican, and now DeSantis wants to cultivate these DeSantis Republicans. And so there have been a few kind of feuds that have gotten out in public, but Trump knows that DeSantis is pretty popular. He has kind of used the culture wars as his meal ticket, and that the "Don't Say Gay" bill that he's did, the COVID response, where he got a lot of criticism early on that he was going to let so many people in Florida die, but if you actually look at the statistics, he did a pretty good job and he kept the economy running open in Florida. And so they are keeping an eye on him. And I don't think Trump is going to face an uncontested primary. And that was kind of the thinking in Washington circles even a few months ago.
Democrats running against DeSantis in Florida, like Nikki Fried and former Governor Charlie Crist, who has joined the Democratic Party, run for the House, would certainly criticize his record on COVID. This is someone who has drawn widespread scorn from those on the left and in times from those in the center for how he handled COVID, but also some Republicans and many in Florida have applauded what he did, as you noted there. Daniel, when you look at finally here the whole map of 2024 of potential candidates, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, he was on Face the Nation this past Sunday. Governor DeSantis having donors in Florida based on your reporting. Former President Trump making his moves, but there's a whole galaxy of others. Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley, Governor Kristi Noem. You mentioned Chris Christie, former Governor Chris Christie. The list of names is probably 50 long, if not longer. What do you make of the dynamics right now in the top tier?
Well, the dynamics, it's still early, but the dynamics could actually help Trump if it's a divided field, because remember last time in 2016, there were rivals like Ted Cruz and Scott Walker and Marco Rubio, and everyone had their few percentage points. And so they were not able to consolidate support of the anti-Trump faction of the Republican Party. And then Trump was able to kind of zoom right through. And so that could be the dynamic here, because if you're a Governor Noem of South Dakota, unless you strike a deal with Governor DeSantis where the informal agreement is, hey, you'll get a cabinet post, you kind of have to dole out those favors early. But if you do endorse someone like DeSantis and then Trump comes in and wins the presidency again, then you could be screwed because you would endorse his opponent. And so there's a lot of complicated dynamics behind the scenes where people don't want to back the wrong horse. And so then that can lead to a chaotic primary and a crowded field. And that is good news for Trump if he is kind of far and away the number one choice and DeSantis is only, getting half of his support.
A lot still to come. Daniel Lippman, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob.
We're going to take a quick break, which means you have a couple of minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. You can catch live local coverage from across the country from all our CBS stations. And while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus. We've got a mountain of content for you to stream there as well, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white? A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now.
Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
people from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a bill allowing local governments and individuals to sue gun makers for negligence after shootings. Newsom says the legislation will allow victims to hold the gun industry responsible, despite federal protections against local lawsuits. Under the bill, gun manufacturers could face litigation if their products are abnormally dangerous or are sold in a way that allows them to end up in the possession of people who are prohibited from owning firearms. The new law is set to take effect in July of 2023. Los Angeles residents could soon see a new mask mandate imposed as the city's number of COVID-19 cases continues to rise. On Saturday, Los Angeles saw its highest number of new daily cases since January. LA County is expected to reach what the CDC calls high transmission status by Thursday as hospitalization rates rise. The city's public health director says a mask requirement will be reimposed if the area stays at high transmission status for 2 weeks. That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white? A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming the internet.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Social media, apps, and games.
I like my iPad, my phone, my Nintendo.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's one click away.
Is growing up digital a blessing or a curse?
There is so much pressure to be perfect.
We need to have conversations regarding healthier usage.
Are the kids all right? The internet, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app. Americans across the country react to the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion, understanding the landmark decision and its impact. For continuing coverage anywhere, stream on the free CBS News app. Nearly half of America's murderers are walking free. Why? CBS News is finding out using the power of our local and national investigative journalists across the country. Crime without punishment. See it all on cbsnews.com.
Stories we are following at the moment. Another inflation report confirms what we all feel at the checkout counter. Food, gas, rent, and pretty much everything else is more expensive. We'll explore what the latest numbers tell us about the state of our economy.